We are honored to have with us today such a distinguished panel, and I would like to thank all of our guests for taking time out of their busy schedule to be with us here today. As a result of the unrest in the Middle East, specifically the war in Syria, Europe has seen an influx of refugees who are fleeing war and destruction. According to Amnesty International, more than 50% of Syria's population is currently displaced. And 4.5 million refugees from Syria are in just 5 countries: Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. However, last year, Europe saw an influx in refugees, as 1 in every 2 of those crossing the Mediterranean, which equals to about 500,000 people, were Syrians escaping the conflict in their country. The influx has caused a crisis in Europe as countries are struggling to cope. The crisis itself has created divisions within Europe on how best to deal with the refugee crisis, with the people seeking protection in Europe. Our distinguished panelists today will speak more on this topic, but before we get to them, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Meto Koloski, the president of the United Macedonian Diaspora, who's going to touch upon what this crisis has meant for the Balkan region, and who will introduce our distinguished guests. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ayla. Thank you all for coming to this really important topic, particularly those of us from Southeast Europe that have been affected by this refugee crisis. Before I do anything, I do want to thank Congresswoman Candice Miller, the chair of the House Administration Committee, as well as the chair of the Congressional Caucus on Macedonia and Macedonian Americans, as well as her staff, Jeff Orzechowski, which really reserved this room, and we've held several events in this beautiful hearing room. One of the reasons I think why we wanted to have this briefing is, you notice a lot of events throughout town on the refugee crisis, but I think it's important, and we think with Ayla and the Southeast Europe Coalition, it's important to make sure that folks on the Hill understand this, particularly now with everything that's going on in terms of the U.S. Increasing its numbers of refugees that they want to admit, as well as the amount of aid that the U.S. is providing to different organizations dealing with the refugee crisis, as well as to different government agencies in the region. We know what recently happened with the EU-Turkey agreement. We've seen the influx of almost about 1 million refugees that have passed through the different Balkan corridor, Western Balkans corridor. You've probably seen in the media the last few days what's been going on in the Macedonia-Greece border, which has been going on for quite some time. And so I think this panel will try to sort of discuss a lot of the issues, and also given the aspect of collective security, what it means for the US and Europe, particularly with what's gone on with the Paris, Brussels, Istanbul, and Ankara attacks, which were quite tragic. And even though some of those attackers were not refugees themselves, perhaps, and were domestic terrorists, they still had some kind of experience with ISIS and Syria. And so this is really important to touch on. We do have, before I welcome the other guests, we do have the ambassador of Serbia, Matkovic, and his country has also been welcoming quite a substantial amount of refugees, and together with him and the Macedonian ambassador, we sat on a panel at the American Bar Association in October, really before a lot of these agreements were happening and a lot of these attacks as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce, in the middle we have the Hungarian ambassador, Dr. Reka Keremenyi. I believe I pronounced your name correctly. I would love to know Hungarian, but I don't. And so she's been ambassador of Hungary to the United States since 2015. Before that, she served as the chief advisor and security policy to the Prime Minister of Hungary. In this capacity, she covered transatlantic issues, Central European regional issues, and the Balkans, Russia, with a particular emphasis on energy security and cybersecurity. She's probably one of Hungary's top energy security experts. So we're really glad that she could be here. Next to her, we have the Macedonian ambassador, which has been ambassador since, I believe, November of 2014. Before that was a professor in international law, but served as Macedonia's deputy prime minister for Euro integration, and is Macedonia's chief negotiator on the name dispute with Greece at the UN. And so thank you, Ambassador. We also have the DCM of Austria, Christian Burdmeier, and who has been here for a few years now, I believe, and half a year. Oh, wow, okay. And so before that, served at the Foreign Ministry in different capacities, and also in Istanbul with the Austrian Cultural Forum, and has served at different Austrian embassies in Bratislava, the permanent representation to the EU, and the EU Council Secretariat in Brussels. Then from the non-embassy or non-diplomatic representatives, we have Francis Trix, who I've known for quite some time, and who served in Washington, or was in Washington with the Woodrow Wilson Center previously, but is a professor emerita of Indiana University and distinguished scholar, senior scholar of the Center for the Study of the Middle East. She was in Washington in 2012 to 2013 with the Woodrow Wilson Center, and was a senior research Fulbright Fellow in Istanbul, Turkey, a linguistic anthropologist, and speaks Turkish, Lebanese, Arabic, Albanian, French, and some Macedonian. Thank you for speaking some Macedonian. And she actually recently returned from working the refugee camps near Serbia and Macedonia and Greece. And so she'll tell us a little bit more about her. And then last but not least is Michel Gabadon, the president, CEO of Refugees International, who before, he took that role in September of 2010, and he'll tell us a lot more about Refugees International and their work, but prior to that, he served as the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees Regional Representative for the United States and the Caribbean. His career with UNHCR spanned more than 25 years, including international service in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific, and he's a trained medical doctor in addition to holding a master's degree in tropical public health. Spent a decade working in Guyana, Zambia, Brazil, London, and Yemen before joining UNHCR as a field officer in Thailand in 1978. So definitely glad to have sort of that perspective on the table. And so thank you very much all for finding time being with us. And so we'll turn it over to the Hungarian ambassador.
For this very kind introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation. I was very much looking
Microphone.
forward to our discussion today.
Microphone.
Oh, it's on. It's even more on now. So thank you very much for the very kind introduction and the very kind idea of bringing us together, because it is indeed a most topical and a very important issue that we need to be discussing in very much in depth. So I was very much looking forward to this opportunity today. Ambassador Namovsky, Minister Burdmeier, Professor Trix, Vice President, is not here, Ambassador György, if I may say, because an old friend and a colleague from the Prime Minister's office from both of our countries for many years. I'm very pleased to be here today. The topic of this discussion is not something that has been characterizing simply our past year. This is an issue that I think will define the years to come, and if we don't develop the right answers, that is definitely a challenge that has been with us for a year, but that will define the future of Europe for the next decade for sure. So it is not unimportant, and it's not a momentary attention that we need to give this topic and the challenge that we're facing, but it's something that is really of weighty consequences. The current crisis is truly unprecedented in the scope of the challenges it poses to the European Union. and its member states. It is challenging the European Union in most fundamental ways and has raised very many hard questions that the EU has had a significant difficulty or almost an inability to answer and address within a proper and long-term way. Yet, we believe that this is not just a European crisis, and it's not simply a European crisis. The massive numbers that are hitting the European continent today is not only requiring a European-wide solution, but it's very clearly a global challenge, something that we all have to face and an issue in which we have to cooperate and we have to try to find a common answer. Because what has been increasingly clear over the last half year, I think it is that this challenge is fundamentally influencing the situation of Europe, the stability of Europe, the future of Europe, and thus the future of the transatlantic community as well. I very much believe that this is why it is of great importance to have a discussion like this today and to have more and more of these discussions on a transatlantic level as well. The migration crisis, however, is one that has affected my country among the first ones on the European continent, and in a most disproportionate way from the beginning. There have been, over the last year, over 391,245 illegal border crossings into Hungary, just the past 12 months. This was the highest per capita in any EU country, and in proportion to the United States, it is the equivalent of 12 million people arriving illegally to US territory within 12 months in a year. It has also been one of the reasons why Hungary has been so vocal in calling for a European solution and in developing European proposals for answering this challenge. But this is also the reason why Hungary has been the first one from the beginning to call the attention to this challenge that we have been facing on the European level. We have seen it very clearly through our own experience that simply opening our doors to the mass migration without any consideration of what it really means and any observation of the real facts on the ground is not an answer to the current crisis. Because it is a most complex crisis, something that has no easy solutions, and it's most clear to all of us that the people entering Europe are the victims in many ways of many aspects of international developments of the past decade, practically. First and foremost, these people who have entered the territory of the European Union through primarily Hungary are definitely and clearly the victims of fundamentally failed international policies. They are also the victims of the poor governance of their own countries, which took away in many ways the dignity of their human lives, but they are also victims of the failed international policies directed to their region and the failed policies of the of Europe also, because we in many ways in Europe created expectations that are impossible to be fulfilled. Most directly and most recently, of course, unfortunately, they are fundamentally and most suffering victims of human trafficking. This is a very important, but unfortunately still untold story of Europe's past half year. It is all too clear that these are fundamental human tragedies that are unfolding in front of our eyes. Yet a simple and a simplistic humanitarian answer is not an answer to this challenge. Empathy is not enough. We have to understand the reality, what is happening, in order to be able to develop the proper answers which will provide stability, security, cooperation, and the strengthening of the regions that we are so much caring for. Our own and their own, where they are coming from. Because this is not simply a humanitarian challenge. It's a security and a policy challenge at the same time, so we have to understand its complexity. What we have developed is some basic principles to be able to answer to this challenge. First, obviously, the #1 principle that we have to follow in developing our answer is that the #1 responsibility of all our political establishment, all of our countries, is to provide security to our citizens and the inhabitants that we are responsible for. So our response to increase border control and the security of borders and to propose that for the other countries as well, both in the European Union and as a common border control, as a European community, is fundamentally in defense of our common values and in defense of our cooperation that we have developed since the end of World War II and since the end of the Cold War in particular. Secondly, we have to be, as a principle, we have to understand that refugees are not the only type of people who are arriving in our continent through this massive wave of migration. There is a distinction that we have to be clear of and that we have to make to identify and to understand who are the legitimate political refugees and who are those migrants that are profoundly choosing this way for economic deliberations. We can be, and we have to be, compassionate to both of these groups, obviously, but our policies and the responsibility and the support that we have to give to these different groups have to be different also. And third, I think we have to be understanding as a principle that these people have a right to their own country. They also are unwilling migrants in many ways, and in large majority, because obviously they all love their own countries the way we love our own countries. So what we have to do and what we have to introduce as a basic principle is that we have to be able to support them to be able to go back to their own countries and have a right to their decent lives in their own countries. These principles have led Hungary to develop a 6-point proposal to the European Union among the first countries. So we very much believe that we have worked on a common European response to this. Many of the original 6-point plan to the European Council that we proposed on September 23rd last year have been followed up on, and you can see in many of the developments since then the leading principles of these proposals. A common border control in which we have a common interest. If we want to defend the European free movement zone, the Schengen zone, is definitely of common interest. We have been forthcoming in providing for a common border, of common control of the common borders, because we very much believe it's a common interest and a common value that we're defending through this. We also were among the first ones, or the very first one, to propose that we have to increase our contribution to the common budget of the European Union to be able to help those countries that are in the real front line of this migration, the first sort of receiving countries, of course, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, where there are massive numbers of migrants who have imposed a burden to these countries, which is intolerable and in a very understandable way too difficult for these countries. So it was Hungary that proposed that we have to increase all our state contribution to the EU budget by 1%, reduce all expenditures by 1%, thereby providing a good 3.3 billion euros, $3.3 billion US dollars, to be used to finance the solution of this crisis, which obviously I think is now what you can see in the negotiations between Germany and Turkey on the actual solution. The figures are, of course, results of negotiations, but I think the understanding that we have to increase the financial contribution towards these countries, which have been able to provide for a large number of the crises, is absolutely there and something that we have proposed from the beginning. We also were the ones to propose that the EU must establish close cooperation with the countries of the region, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, to develop solutions. We also proposed that we should probably involve other international actors to be able to develop a truly tenable answer to this challenge. So we proposed an international cooperation on the issue, which is also something that you can see unfolding. So we very much believe that since we have been hit first by this migration wave, we were the first ones to call attention to the problems and the challenges included in it, but we also have been the first ones to develop answers and to propose long-term solutions for this. At the same time, however, what we had to see over the course of the last year is that there were some very fundamental misperceptions of the developments of the migration challenge in Europe, which really impeded a common understanding and a common response to this challenge. One of the key misunderstandings was definitely conceptual, because a lot of the coverage of the events and of the developments was way too simplistic and simplifying the developments into a humanitarian reading of the developments. It is a very important reading, definitely, and it is there for sure, but it is not the only characteristic that we have to solve. Secondly, there was a geographical problem. All the focus of the international coverage was focusing on as if it was a Syrian refugee problem. Well, this is a lot more complex problem with a lot more nationalities. Just the number of nationalities that we could sort of count as a result of the clear border control at the southern borders of Hungary had resulted of us having over 58 different countries of origin coming through Hungary. Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan have been among the larger countries, just to indicate to you the geographical dispersity of the migration wave. And definitely there was a conceptual problem in the communication of the problem, in which all the attention was on one aspect of the issue, and security was not only disregarded as a major element that every nation has to be able to provide for, but even it was presented as a xenophobic answer. I think there's a big mistake, and that's definitely not the reality from the ground. So what we could see was there was a difference between the media and the policy analysis of the situation. But I think as long as we can understand, although this is not helping at all, that the media has a unisided and slightly irresponsible coverage of the developments, the decision makers have been, I think, showing, especially on the transatlantic level, a lot more responsibility and a lot more understanding. I could see that in our discussions here in Washington, while there was a lot of negative coverage on Hungary's responses to the beginning of the migration challenge, there was a very profound political understanding and support for the need of security, for the need of registration, for the need of defense of the Schengen criteria and the Schengen borders in this context on the side of the policymakers. So I think there's a tangible difference between the two approaches, and I think that can provide as a good foundation for working together in solving this problem. But obviously the challenge is if we follow a hypercritical, mainstream media coverage of the events, what we have to be very worried for is that we're not going to be able to develop the real answers. So the basic illusions that we could see in the media was that this is a refugee crisis, so the answer has to be a humanitarian solution. That obviously is a lot more complex, is a lot more difficult situation, and no simple solutions can be provided for a very complex picture of the arrivals into the European continent. The second big misperception was that the migration crisis is the one that we could see in front of our eyes and we have to solve this problem. In fact, what we have seen is that this is a continuous wave, so even through the distribution of any actual number, we have a continuous added pressure of new people arriving into the continent, so obviously it's not a one-stop shop in which we can develop a solution once and for all. Another misperception was that the opening of the European Union's borders will create an integrated multicultural society. And of course, we do have a lot of problems in the European context on finding successes of integration in any of our countries. And I have, of course, a list of failed efforts of integration of previous waves of integration. But I think we do have to be able to understand that the absorbability capacity of any country is really not as flexible and not as big as we should expect. So I think these are the fundamental misconceptions that we have been facing and that really impeded us from seeing the real solution and the real problem, which have impeded also us from developing a real solution to the problems. And we very much believe that our approach is something that helps us all on a European level to start to develop common answers and achieve long-term stability. First, we believe very much that we have to restore the rule of law, enforcing the commonly agreed rules, both the Schengen Agreement and the Dublin Agreement, the protection of the external borders. This is not a solution, but a prerequisite for any solution. A Europe without borders is something which we really wanted to be wanted to achieve and wanted to be living in. It cannot be realized without secure external borders. The quotas, a second big issue of just debates. It's not increasing solidarity and understanding, but irresponsibility, because that acts as a pull factor. solidarity, what we need is in fulfilling our legal obligations to the European Union common rules. So the cooperation with Greece is pivotal, cooperation in the Balkans with Macedonia, Serbia, Slovenia, and the Balkan countries, I think, is fundamental for this. We very much support this. We also very much believe that we have to establish a special partnership with the countries that are bearing the largest burden in this issue: Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, as we have been proposing it from the beginning. And we also very much believe that without addressing the root causes of the crisis, Syria, Iraq, and the situation and the instability of the Middle East, there will be no long-term solution. So as our effort to enhance this aspect of the solution, the real long-term solution, we have a military contribution to fight against ISIL. We have 200 people in the north of Iraq, and we have increased our development assistance to refugee funds as well. All of these, I believe, are pointing to the same direction. We have to insist on the restoration and the application of the rule of law, and in helping the stability of the Middle East. Obviously, I think in a capsule, that is a fundamentally important challenge to the European Union, as I said at the beginning, something that will influence our long-term stability and future, both in the European continent as well as in the transatlantic context. So I very much hope that we will enjoy the possibility of talking about it, but I also see it as a fundamental responsibility that we discuss with each other, we understand each other better, and we try to develop a common answer. Thank you very much for your invitation and for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for the excellent introductory presentation. Dear colleagues, friends, I'd like at the beginning to thank the United Macedonian Diaspora and the Bosnia and Herzegovina Council for the organization of this hearing, which I think is coming in the right time when the refugee and the migrant crisis are part of the media reports even in the United States, let alone in the European Union. I would also like to thank our colleagues ambassadors who are participating in the events on this topic that I think would raise the awareness in the United States about the current problem in on the European continent. Also looking forward to the presentation of Professor Trix about the impact on the United States itself. The United States is geographically protected from the possibility to be influenced from the refugees. However, since Ambassador Severkin mentioned, it is a global problem. It's not only a European problem. So I'd like to share some of the Macedonian points of view and the situation in Macedonia and the influence that the refugee migrant crisis has had on the Macedonian society and the role of the Republic of Macedonia in the crisis and in the circumstances surrounding the crisis. What we have seen in the past year is literally over 1 million people coming to the European continent from countries like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, which can be described as refugees running away from the war, but also from other countries in Africa, which are trying to be disguised as refugees and enjoy the benefits of the refugees. We have to be very sensitive when we are defining the aspects of the crisis, because when we talk about refugees, it's about individuals, people who are running away from the war and have nowhere to return. But on the other hand, currently most of the people trying to get into Europe are from countries which are not countries at war, but are trying to infiltrate in the refugee routes and settle somewhere in Western Europe. So what the last year has shown is that there is a lack of capability on behalf of the European Union as a structure to deal with crises like this. There is a lack of solidarity between the European nations to deal with a situation that is endangering the European Union as a structure, but also the individual national societies and the stability of those societies in Europe. And also there is a lack of awareness of what this refugee migrant crisis can bring to the political and demographic and social stability in Europe. What we have to discuss are several aspects, namely the aspect of the human rights and the rights of the refugees from Syria and Iraq mostly, which are people that, as I said, have nowhere to return, but we also have to take into account the fact that before these individuals arrive on the European continent, they are not arriving directly from Syria. They are arriving from Turkey and then moving to Greece or to Bulgaria. So if you analyze the situation, the refugees from Syria have already been granted the status of refugees in Turkey, and there are several million, the latest numbers are 2.2 million, I think, currently, refugees in Turkey, and they are just trying to continue and get a status of the same status of refugee in Western European countries, which are offering greater benefits for them compared to the conditions they have in Turkey. So although they are passing through a number of countries, which are some of them even members of the European Union, they are not interested to stay in Turkey, they are not interested to stay in Greece, nor in Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia. Some of them decide to stay in Austria, but most of them want to stay in Germany and Sweden. Which is also related to the aspect that I was mentioning, that not all of the people are simply running away from the war conflict, but many of them are seeking for a better life and seeking to enjoy the benefits that the Western European, some of the Western European countries are providing. So what is the current status of the crisis is that more than 1 million of the refugees or migrants have arrived in Germany and in other Western European countries, but we still have nearly 50,000 stuck in a way in Greece, which are trying to get to Macedonia and continue what used to be the Balkans migrant route. However, after the deal EU-Turkey was reached, Macedonia, together with all the other countries in the Western Balkans, has decided to declare its border closed to the individuals, as I said, based on the agreement which was reached between the European Union and Turkey. It is not a unilateral decision from Macedonia, it is a decision adopted by all the other countries in the region. What the situation is in Greece is that there are still more than 10,000 people on the very border crossing between Greece and Macedonia, and as we have seen also in the US media, these individuals are still trying to enter the Macedonian territory and continue north to Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Austria, and then to Germany. In the last weeks, we have had a number of violent attempts to enter the Macedonian territory, which were followed by appropriate reaction of the Macedonian security forces. As any other country in the world, Macedonia has the right to defend its territory, but what is peculiar in this situation is that Macedonia is not only defending its own territory, but it's defending all the other countries on the northern side, because the refugees that are trying to enter Macedonia are not seeking to stay in Macedonia. They are not seeking asylum in Macedonia. Out of nearly 1 million people that have crossed the Macedonian territory in the last year, less than 100 have asked for an asylum in Macedonia. I'm sure that the number is the same in the other countries on the so-called Balkans migrant route. So we have to take into consideration the experience of Macedonia in dealing with refugees. Those of you who are dealing with the issue of refugees will remember that Macedonia welcomed 360,000 refugees in the Kosovo crisis in 1991, which was 18% of the Macedonian population. It is the same as the United States welcomes 60 million refugees on its own territory. Macedonia also received thousands of refugees from the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, also from the conflict in Croatia. And at the end of the day, the Macedonians themselves have been refugees in their history. So they're aware of what is it like to be a refugee and what is it like to take care of refugees. So we have done whatever we could about the condition of these refugees. I must mention that the response on behalf of the European Union has not been appropriate in this case. Although there were a number of promises, Macedonia has not received the financial support from the European Union. We have, however, received a lot of support from our friends in the other countries in the Western Balkans, the other countries in Central Europe, which have not only assisted us in the physical protection of the border, but also have exchanged their experience in this matter, and we are thankful for the assistance that we have received from these countries. What has to be also taken into account is that we are discussing the refugee and migrant crisis, and sometimes I think a lot of discussions are ignoring the fact that the awareness of about the problem was raised after the terrorist attacks in Paris and in Brussels. Given the fact that some of the individuals that were committing these acts were entering the European continent disguised as refugees. So we have evidence that at least 2 of the attackers in Paris have passed through Macedonia as refugees, and also another individual that was part of the group that attacked Brussels a few weeks ago. So we have to be very careful when we are discussing these issues, because on one hand we are not seeking to describe all the refugees as potential terrorists, but also we cannot ignore the fact that among the millions of people that are trying to get the refugee status, there are some individuals which will try to abuse the solidarity and will try to infiltrate themselves into the European societies with another aim, not only to become refugees. This will result, according to my opinion, in the rise of the extreme right on the European, in some of the European societies. It will create difficulties in the cultural communities, and it will increase the awareness that we need to pay more attention to the integration of the immigrants in the European societies. Given the fact that some of the individuals that were part of the terrorist attacks were born and raised in the Western European societies, educated in their educational systems, and were part of their social life since they were born, and again, they were not able to embrace the Western cultural values. This all raises the issue of if Europe cannot integrate the existing immigrant communities, how it is going to be able to deal with new numbers of immigrants which will try to integrate themselves into the European societies. Of course, again, I'm not intending to describe this as a mission impossible. However, there are significant difficulties, and I think that the next few years will prove that the current status in most of the Western European societies is that there is a lack of ability to integrate the communities which are coming from different cultural and religious backgrounds. And at the end, I would like also to mention that we are sometimes also ignoring the fact that if we want to solve this this issue, we have to solve it at the beginning, which is where it all starts with the war in Syria and in Iraq. We cannot solve the migrant and refugee crisis without solving and reaching peace into the areas where the refugees are coming from. At the end of the day, if there was no war in Syria or Iraq, there wouldn't have been refugees trying to get away from the war. What is very important in this aspect is that the US should, although not directly endangered by this wave of refugees, should assume its role in dealing with stability in the Middle East together with the European partners, with some other countries, and we have to stop the violence in the regions where the refugees are coming from in order to prevent additional number of refugees. Because we have to deal with the reality. If somebody does not like the reality, we can either change it or we have to change our mind and accept the reality. The reality at this point is that there are millions of people trying to get into Europe. There are difficulties in dealing with the situation on behalf of the European Union and on behalf of some Western European countries. Some countries like Macedonia and Serbia, the Balkans, are put in a position to defend the European Union from itself. Namely, the refugees that are coming to Macedonia are coming from Greece, which is an EU member state, and are trying to get to Western European countries, which are again EU member states. So the solution and the stability in the Middle East will of course contribute to a better situation and decreasing the number of refugees. So at the end, I would like to thank you again for the participation and hoping that we'll have a fruitful discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina and also the United Macedonian Diaspora for organizing this important event today. I think it's important to have many events about this important subject, the refugee crisis in Europe. The numbers were already mentioned, so over 1 million refugees crossed Central Europe, including Austria, since the beginning of the crisis. 90,000 have applied for asylum in Austria last year. This number is increasing in this year, so the trend is continuing. Austria is the country with the biggest refugee burden per capita after Sweden. If you compare the numbers to the United States, the per capita number, that would mean it would be comparable as if the US would have taken on board in 1 year 4 million refugees, so 6 times the number of the population of Washington, D.C. So it's a huge burden, and so it was clear that this trend could not continue in this way. Austria has a long tradition of taking on board refugees. When I think of the Hungary crisis in 1956 or the Balkan War in the 90s, so this tradition is there, and so Austrians were welcoming refugees since the beginning of the refugee crisis in summer of last year. But the problem was that the influx of refugees was an uncontrolled one, and so it presented a security problem for not only for Austria but for the whole European Union. It was also stretching the capacities, the budgetary capacities of Austria. One has to find ways of finding accommodations for the refugees. So it was important to end the policy of just waving through the refugees. When you look at the structure of the migrants, of the migrant flows, you see that not even 50% come from Syria. The Hungarian ambassador has mentioned 58, they're from 58 different countries, so they're not coming from war countries alone. Many of them are also looking for a better life, especially in Germany and Sweden, but increasingly also in Austria. So our goal must be to decide who can come to Europe and whom we really want to help. This is, when you look at the structure of the migrant flow, it's important to make the distinction between the people fleeing really from war and the people looking for a better life. What we certainly don't want is to have the smugglers decide on who is coming into the European Union. So a number of important measures are necessary. So the most important one is to secure external borders. Also the readmission of migrants who do not need protection. The readmission to the countries of origin is an important measure. And another measure is to increase the assistance for the refugees in the region close to their countries of origin. because when Austria spends money to support one refugee, it can spend exactly the same amount to support 20 refugees in Turkey. So this is the financial implication of refugees. So it makes sense to support as many refugees as possible close to the country of origin. Of course, Austria is also granting bilateral aid, for instance, to Greece. We have just granted €5 million to Greece in order to support the refugee, the building up of refugee camps in Greece. And also we granted bilateral aid to Lebanon. So a number of steps were taken in the last weeks that were going in the right direction. So there was a conference, a meeting between the Ministers of Interior and Foreign Affairs of Austria and the Western Balkan countries in Vienna. That was in February, and there it was decided to reduce the flow of refugees through the Balkan route. That was an important first step. In the meantime, well, of course, this decision has been confronted with some criticism, but in the meantime, this policy of stopping the waving through approach is now already EU common policy. There was a decision in the meantime of the EU heads of states and government on 7 March, who have clearly stated that this approach of waving through had to stop. And on the same day, also on 7 March, the agreement with Turkey, EU-Turkey agreement was reached. The agreement is now implemented successfully since the beginning of last week. But there's a new challenge now that the Balkan route is kind of almost closed. There's a new challenge coming from the south. So from the central Mediterranean route, the number of refugees on the central Mediterranean route has increased by 80% since the beginning of this year. So this is a new big challenge. The Austrian authorities are now coordinating strongly with the Italian authorities on how to deal with this challenge at the common border in the southern part of Austria, the Brenner border crossing. So let's see how the situation evolves. In conclusion, I have to say it's important to stop the massive influx of refugees. Otherwise, also the political landscape in Austria could change. So the far-right political forces would gain importance. It's important to keep a balance within society. It's important to step up integration efforts in order to increase the acceptance of the population for the refugees. So in this sense, many steps are taken in order to speed up the integration of refugees in Austria. First step, of course, is to learn the German language, and then to find a job, which is not an easy task. And of course, we have to find a European solution to this European challenge. Something that is not easy. It's an opportunity for the EU to show that it is able to do successfully crisis management, and it's an opportunity also for the EU member states to show solidarity with the countries that are most hit by the migration crisis. It's also an opportunity for other countries in the world to show the solidarity with the European Union, including the United States. It's certainly not in the interest of the United States to have a Europe weakened by a refugee crisis. And to conclude, the most important thing is to address the root causes of the migration flows, which is to find a solution to the conflict in Syria. And I hope that the Vienna process leads very soon to a peaceful solution. It's also key to increase assistance to the countries of the region. Thank you very much.
I'm honored to speak with this distinguished company of ambassadors and head of Refugee International. I'm a professor, but I'm a Detroiter. Those of you Americans here, I'm not the ambassador of Detroit, but I grew up with immigrants, Hungarian immigrants from '56. We did not ask them to go back. Serbian, Macedonian, Arab. I grew up with Syrian Americans in my church and Muslims. So those of you from urban centers in the United States, we know we love immigrants and refugees, and they're the hardest working people around. That's my background, so it's a little bit different. Europe has a different flavor. You have to allow that. But when the Hungarians came in '56, that was positive. I'm a professor, and so we do PowerPoint because people don't like just to listen to us. So allow me to give you pictures. And actually, I like to walk around because I'll have trouble behind this podium. I was in December and January, I went to the Balkan Migrant Corridor. I speak Arabic. I learned it mostly in Detroit with immigrants. I speak village Arabic, and I thought I could be useful with some of the refugees. I worked with refugees from the Balkan Wars in the 90s, and when people have to leave their homes, it's awful. And I thought I would find out what was maybe not in the newspapers and be of some use. And you see, I'm not as young as a lot of these people here. And Arab culture respects age, so it's nice to be older. I start here to give you a picture. Whenever you see refugees in a group, they're undifferentiated. They're just refugees. No one likes to be called a refugee. But as soon as you talk to them, and I could speak to the Arabic-speaking ones, especially the Syrians and the Iraqis, they're people, and they come from a place, and they have professions. So this couple from Aleppo, they were teachers, and they hoped to become teachers in Germany. This was one of their 2 children. I will go quickly, because I know this is lunchtime, and you're probably all hungry, yes. My first point, I have 4 points. My first point is the Syrians coming to Europe are middle-class, educated people. They are not like the people in Belgium. This is for the ambassador from Macedonia. These are not like the Moroccans, these North Africans that settled there who were not middle class and educated. So it's the Middle East. I've lived in the Middle East, as I said. I speak Arabic. I've lived in Lebanon and in Turkey and Syria. This is a very different group of people. For example, the young man on the left here, if you're a refugee, you wait hours. These young men were waiting 3 hours for the train in southern Macedonia, in Gevgelija. The young man on the left wants to study finance. The young man on the right wants to study engineering. They're middle class. The family on the right is from Damascus. This is a different group of people. These are people who are going to make really good European citizens, or they would make very good North African citizens. So what I want to say today, I've always done this when I teach, is tell you where I'm going and try to make it clear. My first point, the Syrian refugees are middle-class educated. I want to say what were the problems of the Syrian refugee trail to Europe. This is of the Balkan corridor. There really were problems, and all of you who have countries or along that know that. It was not well organized. The policies were not clear. There were many problems. My third point is why ISIS hates the refugees. And I want to make that really clear. ISIS hates the refugees. My fourth area is North American responses. I think that's important for us to look at. And then I want to make some recommendations. So if I get distracted, I easily get distracted, but that's where I'm heading. First, the Syrians have survived 5 years of war. It started in March 2011 with demonstrations. They didn't leave right away. Middle-class educated people don't leave their homes right away. They try to hold out. They think it's going to be just a small skirmish. They think like World War I, it'll be done by Christmas, or the Civil War, it'll be over by Christmas, but it wasn't. So they tried to hold on a long time. They didn't really start leaving till 2013, 2014. Why people left, and I talked to people. They left with accumulation of things, when their homes were destroyed, when family members were killed, when their businesses were destroyed, when their daily life was in ruins. Women said, when my children went off to school, I didn't know if they would come home alive. You can only take so much of this. So fear of children being killed, sons being drafted. If you don't know if your sons are going to be drafted into some militia, that's horrifying. The Assad regime's revenge, if you get a relative on a list that the Assad regime is against, you get out of that country because you may end up in prison. Or they were 3 years in Turkey, and the thing is, you said, I think, Mr. Ambassador, that you could get refugee status in Turkey. You can't get refugee status in Turkey. You're in Turkey, but you work, you're not necessarily paid. Your children don't go to school, so your savings go down. After 3 years, what are they going to do? So that's when they finally left. And then it's good to have a map. I love maps. That's not all of Syria. That pink area is mostly where people live. It's also where most of the conflict is. North is Turkey. To the left, that little green country is Lebanon. To the south is Jordan, which is mostly desert. Those triangles are refugee camps. Now, I don't know what you know about refugees, but the day of refugee camps is pretty much gone. Refugee camps are like prisons. No one goes into them almost willingly. Maybe some women do when they don't have any food at all. But 85% of the refugees in Jordan are not in camps. Most of them in Turkey are not in camps. No one wants to be in a camp. It's kind of like a prison where you get food. People want to be an ordinary life. So you can see Turkey, which has less population than Germany, has 2.7 million Syrians. Lebanon, which has 4 million people, has 1.2 million Syrians. Has 1 out of every 5 people in Lebanon is a Syrian refugee. That's a huge number. And Lebanon is a small country. It's intensely dense population. Jordan has over 500,000 refugees that are Syrians, also has Iraqi refugees. Iraq, would be up to the left there on the wall, has 250,000 Syrian refugees. Egypt has refugees. So there's 4.7 million Syrians in neighboring countries. And we talk about giving aid to these countries, but there's something known as host country fatigue. These countries have had these refugees now for 5 years. You can take so much. These are not wealthy countries. These are not deeply secure countries. So after about 3 or 4 years, they started, those who especially had hopes for their children to be in school and a future, started looking to the West. This is the Syrian refugee trail, and it's been problematic. It's not a great map because there's 2 ways out of Turkey to 2 Greek islands. Then they would take a boat to Piraeus, then they would take a bus up to northern Greece, then they go through Macedonia, then they go Serbia up. The first one was through Hungary, that was closed last fall. Then they go through Croatia, Slovenia, up to Austria, and then Germany, Sweden, and so forth. That was the trail. It was problematic. It was ad hoc. Oh, do you want the microphone on? No. It was problematic for lots of reasons. It was uncontrolled. As people have said quite rightly, lots of different people came. A lot of the people who went didn't realize that just getting to Western Europe didn't mean you got asylum. There were constant dangers on the refugee trail, smugglers who exploited people. The money it took to get across that little bit of the Aegean was usually around 1,000 euros. That's a lot of money per person, and you didn't always make it. Robbers along the trek. They knew that the refugees were carrying all the funds they had. Women would carry the money, and they'd go after the women to get the money. Traffickers. Weather, bad weather. This is a man who had people in his truck, and the Austrians picked him up. You remember that. And there were some really awful scenes. Women, people didn't talk how the women were exploited. Why were there more men? Because they were afraid to send women because sexual assault along the way. As this is a woman in Berlin said, there were always 2 ways to pay the smugglers. The smugglers in Turkey, and they were of different nationalities, mind you, would find an attractive woman, make sure she was robbed, and then try to get sexual pleasures. This woman spent an extra year in Turkey getting money because she wouldn't go with the smugglers. And then this is the most famous photograph of this Syrian crisis. This is a 3-year-old who was drowned. This is on the coast of Turkey. His family had tried to get into, I'll talk about getting to Canada, he had a relative there. But his family tried 3 times to get to one of the Greek islands, and the 3rd time their boat capsized. His mother and his brother also drowned. The growing numbers, though, I mean, this is what people have rightly said, it was totally uncontrolled. 2014, 50,000 people went along this corridor. 2015, look at 16 times number, 816,000 people. In the first 2 months of 2016, there were 123,000. I mean, this is just too many people. By 2016, though, half were women and children, because countries were saying you're not going to be allowed to bring your families. It was closed in the beginning of March, but people were left stranded along the Balkan refugee corridor in Croatia, Serbia, Macedonia, and Greece. Now, this is something a lot of people don't know. Why does ISIS hate the refugees? This is important. You know, when we look at videos from ISIS, we mostly see the executions, but most of ISIS videos are trying to prove to Muslims that ISIS is a state. ISIS isn't a state. They're also trying to show that they have sewage and electricity, but they really don't. Why ISIS hates the refugees? Because refugees have to escape to get out of ISIS lands in Syria and northern Iraq. The refugees take young men away from their armed forces. The refugees take people away from their tax base. The refugees are a brain drain and an urban and a labor drain. But most of all, the refugees are a public relations disaster for ISIS. Every Syrian and Iraqi Muslim family that leaves demonstrate they prefer going over the sea in dinghies. They prefer going to quote-unquote Christian lands than to stay in the Islamic Caliphate. That's a public relations disaster. Do you see that? That says you aren't what you say you are. That's really important, and ISIS cannot stand that. So ISIS does everything to discredit the refugees. Now, the North American responses. Let's look at Canada. I grew up in Detroit, which is on the Canadian border. We used to watch Ontario provincial meetings. They are the dullest meetings you've ever seen. We used to whoop with laughter. But I stayed up to watch the Quebec thing, and you know, the immigrants settled that. Anyhow, Canada's fascinating. Do we have any Canadians here? No, Canada's fun. And no, it's a good contrast with America. And a lot of Macedonians in Toronto. Oh, bravo. Toronto's a good city. Okay, January 2015, the conservative government of Stephen Harper only promised to take 10,000 Syrian refugees over 3 years and only persecuted religious minorities. Now, if you know anything about Syria, it's got amazing minorities. But anyhow, that's what he said. But the crisis became politicized when it was known that Alan Kurdi, that little 3-year-old who drowned, his family had made 3 attempts to get into Canada and been denied because he had an aunt out in BC in British Columbia. So this became an issue in the Canadian politics, believe it or not. And the Liberals won. Justin Trudeau's won, gained power in November of last year, 2015, and they had promised to take 25,000 Syrian refugees in 2016, and they fulfilled their promise and brought more than 25,000. And how did they do it? They did it with both private and government. So Canada's got its act together. What's the US response? The US response is really mixed, and I think those of you who said that this is not a European problem, this is a global problem, are so right. The U.S. provides $4 billion in financial assistance to relief agencies, so it's the largest donor of all nations. That's good. President Obama said he would accept 10,000 refugees. Some wanted the U.S. to accept 65,000. Some were vague. I think this was Lindsey Graham said, we'll take our fair share. What does that mean? Some did not want us to take any, or only Christian Syrians. Well, Christian Syrians have been coming to America. I mean, I grew up with Christian Syrians. They've been coming for decades. What has the U.S. taken? We've taken, so far, since 2011, we've taken 3,127 Syrian refugees. The U.S. governors, this is 31 especially, U.S. governors' attitudes towards resettlement of Syrian refugees, the ones who are against it, this is 31, mostly were afraid of terrorism after the Paris attacks. Yet none of the terrorists were refugees, and none were Syrian. And that's really a different group. Those Moroccans are very different than the Syrians. The Middle East is very different. Don't confuse those groups. Now, there's something else that those of you congressional staffers know is H.R. 4731. The Refugee Program Integrity Restoration Act that just went through the Judiciary Committee in March. And it would dismantle the U.S. refugee admissions program. It's opposed by 234 major organizations from Amnesty International to the World Council of Churches. Instead of having refugees prioritized by vulnerability, it would be for religious persecution of minorities. It's not a wise act. It's just not wise for lots of reasons. I'd be happy to talk to people about this. It's basically an anti-Muslim thing. It's the congressional equivalent of what the Republican candidates are talking about now. It's not honorable for us. Now, I wanted to talk something about America as a country of immigrants, not in a sentimental way. In the 1930s, the president of Princeton University said, "Herr Hitler shakes the tree and we take the fruit." Does everybody understand what he was saying? So, refugees who've contributed to America, and I'm just going to give you some, and I'm going to do it quickly, but let's start with an Italian and a German, Enrico Fermi, who did the first nuclear reactor, Albert Einstein, physicist. Refugees who contributed to America, Hungarians, I wanted to do this, Andras Grof, the founder of Intel, George Soros, businessman and philanthropist. So many students from Eastern Europe have profited from this. I could do this. Austrian, I wanted to have this. We could go on for the Austrians again and again. Schoenberg, the composer. A Russian, Sergey Brin, is the co-founder of Google. Jack Madeleine Albright, first woman Secretary of State. Cuban, Gloria Estefan, the singer. And then those of you who might say, well, these are not Middle Easterners. Well, there's the son of a Syrian refugee who contributed to America, is Steve Jobs. So I'm saying that refugees, you know, they're the fruit. So, U.S. summary. U.S. is a country of immigrants. 13% of the U.S. is foreign-born. Traditionally, we've been welcoming. We've resettled 2 million refugees since 1990, and we're strong because of their initiative and loyalty. The current political rhetoric in H.R. 4731, with its fear of Muslims, is based on ignorance, and it's unworthy of us. These will hurt us in the long run. I'm from Michigan, as I said, Detroit. I actually ran an Arabic program in Dearborn. Do you know how many people from Dearborn have actually gone to ISIS? Just about none. And if you really want to know what's going on in the Arab community, you learn from your Arab citizens. That's where you learn. This will hurt us in the long run. Hospitality towards Syrian refugees of different religious backgrounds is wise. The U.S. is seen as a model for the world. Our attitude toward refugees really matters. This time it's not so much numbers as an attitude. We need to be in solidarity with what's going on in Europe. So now my last thing is recommendations. I have 5 recommendations. And this is from actually working with refugees and being in Europe and working with other refugees. One is to devise an immediate solution for the stranded refugees in the Balkan corridor. Yes, it was good there was a meeting in Vienna in February, but you don't leave refugees stranded in Croatia and in Serbia and in Macedonia and Idomeni. I've been in Idomeni. You don't leave them stranded. There are not that many. It's probably all of 14,000 people max. You don't leave them stranded. 2, you insist that Greece withdraw its blocking of Macedonia's name. I don't know how many of you realize, but one of the reasons Macedonia, which is a crucial country in the Balkans, has been blocked from membership in international organizations because Greece says the name Macedonia is part of its history. The name Macedonia is part of that country and those people, and that should not be allowed. How can you coordinate when you're not allowed to belong to these organizations? Macedonia should be receiving aid from these countries, should be part of these things, and as long as that's blocked, it can't happen. 3 really relates to 2, set up regular consultations among all nations involved to strengthen communication and efficient responses. They've been doing this, but you can do it better when you have regular status. 4, see refugees as opportunities to come together, devise shared policies, broaden economic and cultural landscape. I don't know why the EU didn't do what I did, and if an anthropologist like me had worked last summer and said, listen, you're bringing people from Somalia, from Yemen, from Morocco and Algeria, these are not the people that need it most. Limit who can come. Tell people coming to Europe doesn't guarantee asylum. That should have stopped. And 5, do not fear and isolate Muslims. These are really conservative, family-loving people. guard against power structures like ISIS, not broad religious affiliations. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I want to give you time for questions. I think I want to address two things. First, how the crisis evolved and what have we learned from the crisis that we should really take on stock for the future. And two, what had to be done right now in the context of the current EU-Turkish deal. So as we saw, the people didn't start moving in 2015. The crisis built up much before. Until 2013, refugees in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon were still looking at the possibility to go home. As we discussed, most of them were in an urban environment, and over the years, while overall humanitarian funding increased, it did not increase in proportion to the needs. And what we've seen is the humanitarian appeals were funded at a lesser level year after year after year. At the same time, refugees in an urban environment do not require only humanitarian aid, which is good at addressing vulnerabilities. Refugees in an urban environment put pressure on local health services, on local schools, on housing, on transport, and lots of other issues that affect the structure of the communities in which they are. And humanitarian aid cannot respond to that. So what we've let is a situation fester over time without really addressing some of the root causes. In 2014, some started leaving towards Italy through the Libyan connection. That was a fairly dangerous one. And in 2015, when the smugglers changed their route towards Turkey, they made it cheaper, so it was benefit for the smugglers, but it was also more accessible to the refugees. The first refugees who left were those who had already been in neighboring countries for some time. And there were three factors, basically, that determined their decision to leave. One is a realization that return to Syria was not for any foreseeable future. They become desperate that they will eventually be able to go back to their country because the conflict was just getting more complex. Two, they did not have access to jobs in a legal way in any of these countries, and livelihood became a major issue for them. Most of those refugees who had lived out of their economies saw these economies shrink, and those who still had some money said, well, let me try it with smugglers and try for a better future, because here there is nothing left. And interestingly enough, the third reason was a desperation that their kids were not getting education, and therefore they were going to sacrifice their future. And these were the three main motivators to the movement. I have to insist that the people who moved were those with still some money. You have in these countries people who've been pushed from poverty to misery. We have seen an increase in early marriages, in child labor, and in what we call sex for food or survival sex, which is basically prostitution as the only means for some families to survive. These are people who don't even have the money to pay a smuggler to try to move out. So we've let the crisis fester for very long, and the goals of the UN refugee agencies and other organizations, including ours, for three things to be looked at were not heeded, I would say, on time. One was to increase the support to humanitarian agencies to address vulnerabilities. The second is to start looking at the development needs of these countries to make sure that some of the structural impact of refugees and host communities were addressed. And the third was to open legal pathways to move out of the region, and not only through resettlement. You can do family reunification, you can offer student grants, you can offer work permits. There are all kinds of ways which are not necessarily permanent resettlement that could have alleviated the pressure on the neighbor countries to Syria and offered some hope that the legal way will not mean that you have to pay for smugglers and take the risks that these people have taken. So I think this is something to remember very well, that if we leave a crisis fester, it will burst out one day as it did burst out on the beaches of Greece in 2015. Now, to come to the EU-Turkish agreement, I certainly understand that the European countries had to come together to show that the disunity that had been expressed publicly between different governments was only temporary, and that there was a real EU working out. I think it had to address the chaos of the movement for political reasons, and it has also to pacify some of the movements that were growing in many European countries on a very anti-immigrant, anti-refugee feeling. So I think I understand why there was a necessity to push for the agreement. I think there were some legitimate premises to the agreement. The idea that Turkey needed more aid was a legitimate one, and the idea that you had to bring order to the movements was of course legitimate. My fear, however, is that the agreement has been rushed and that some geostrategical interest of both the EU and Turkey took over. And not only the agreement was some sort of rushed, the implementation has been put into practice basically days after the agreement was signed. And it leaves quite a few risks open, and I just want to mention a few. One is that and I'm glad that after the draft, which was criticized, the EU incorporated in the agreement provisions for refugee processing in Greece, and that people who would be deemed to be refugee would not be returned, or would be returned under certain guarantees. So that's a progress, certainly. But certainly the system is not yet equipped to respond to that. So we have an agreement that comes into force at a time when the structures in Greece are not yet ready to guarantee due process. And the fact that the agreement provides for accelerated procedure always creates a little bit of anxiety on how it would be carried out. So I think our concern is very much how is the agreement going to be implemented in the coming months. The second is the one-for-one trade of refugees is not a legal pathway. It is basically a more mercantile agreement between Turkey and the EU, but it does not offer an increase in legal pathways. And the High Commissioner did call on March 30th an international meeting, which was presided by the Secretary General in Geneva, to discuss precisely how could the international community, not just Europe, but the international community, respond to the possibility to create legal ways to leave the neighboring countries. And to be polite, I would say that this meeting was extremely underwhelming. The proposals by countries and by big European countries, by the US, by others, were absolutely minimal. And therefore, we see an agreement that in the text seems to indicate that there is a proper way to do things, but the proposals to make these things real are not there. None of the big European countries, I'm French, I can say that, came with reasonable proposals for resettlement or for other legal pathways. The US stated the numbers we've seen, which is less than half what Canada is offering. So nice countries that offered opportunities. Costa Rica offered 500 student grants. Tiny, puny Costa Rica made a little commitment. Uruguay, as we discussed, has offered some places, but the big countries are not coming up with solutions. And in my view, what we are going to have is an agreement that is going to be partly effective, as we're seeing now that the numbers are reduced, but that does not address the root cause, which is, are we sharing the burden fairly with Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon? To date, we have not, and I think what the High Commissioner used to call for 3 years ago is absolutely actual today. It is make sure humanitarian aid is increased and not at the expense of other refugee programs in the world. Make sure that development agencies are taking very seriously aid to these countries that are mid-level income countries. They do not traditionally come into the purview of development agencies, but they should for stability purpose, not because of GDP or other considerations. And 3, work seriously at opening large legal pathways to Syrians who feel desperate where they are. If we don't address these 3 things, we will stop the movement right now to Greece. It will pick up at some point somewhere else, because smugglers are smart. When there is a need, they will find a way. There has been some months ago a report that when the first walls and barriers were being erected in Europe, some refugees were traveling through Russia to Murmansk and coming into Norway, and a thriving bicycle trade started developing in Murmansk to help people cross into Europe, north of the North Pole. There are always ways when people are desperate. So we do have to address the root causes urgently, because we failed to respond to them in the past 3 years, and that would be my final comments.
Thank you.